This is Terry Cleaver here reporting for Dover Community Radio. Here we are at the Western Heights Mini Open Day on Saturday the 23rd and Sunday the 24th of October 2010. And here with me we have Tracy, the Secretary of the Western Heights Preservation Society. So Tracy, could you tell us a little bit about the Open Day and what you're doing up here today, please?
This is the second open day that we're having this year, following the massive success of our June weekend. And what we're doing this weekend is opening up the drop redoubt and the grand shaft for people to come and have a look around. It'll be the last chance for us to open the redoubt until April at the earliest next year, because in a couple of weeks' time we'll have to close the drop redoubt completely due to the bat hibernation season. The bats move in, we move out. So this is a good opportunity for us to get the public in, to raise a bit of awareness and interest in the Western Heights, particularly in the drop redoubt area, and try to give the public a bit of an idea about the buildings and about what the Western Heights Preservation Society are actually trying to do.
So what do the Western Heights Preservation Society actually do up here?
Most of the work that we do up here when we come up for our work days is an awful lot of clearance work. Because the drop redoubt is very rarely used anymore, nature has moved in very quickly, and the drop redoubt buildings have sustained some very serious damage from quite large plants such as buddleia and elder in particular, and the ivy on the walls. So we're trying to work together with other agencies such as the White Cliffs Countryside Project, very closely with English Heritage and indeed with Dover District Council, to try and minimise the damage that's been done up here by the plants. An unfortunate bit of work that we also have to do up here is to clean up after the vandals have tried to break in, which still unfortunately occurs very frequently.
So you mentioned the drop redoubt there. For any locals listening who don't know what the drop redoubt is, please could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, certainly. The drop redoubt is the extreme eastern end of the Western Heights fortifications. You can get to it and you can walk around its ditch at any time. It's right on the end of Drop Redoubt Road, just off Military Road. And the idea of this building here was to be able to function independently of everything else up here, to give fire against any invading French army. It was built to try and keep Napoleon out, had he landed, and along with all the other fortifications on the Western Heights, to try and give a concerted defensive effort to keep the French from getting a foothold in the town of Dover itself.
And could you please describe it for us?
If you were to look at it from the air, it would it's a pentagonal shape. It's a five-sided building. There's 4 projections that stick out into the ditch, which are called caponniers, and they would be for the soldiers inside to actually give anti-personnel fire down into the ditch. Inside the fort there are barracks, there's the main magazine, there's some officers' quarters, and also you can get down into the caponniers themselves to see what it would have been like as a soldier based here.
And can you tell us a little bit about what it would have been like for the soldiers to be based there in that time?
In the very early period, I have to say, I don't think it would have been all that pleasant. There were 4 barracks, 200 men in 4 barracks. That's 50 men in 1 barrack. That's not really particularly comfortable for the men concerned, I don't think. But in the 1860s, they changed that completely. They altered the 5th barrack, and instead of being 200 men in 4 barracks, it was 95 men in 5 barracks. So it went from 50 down to 19, much more comfortable for all. The officers had their own quarters just down away from the main soldiers' barracks, and the sergeants actually had their own quarters opposite the main barracks themselves. So rank was very much preserved, and each rank had their better accommodation. So if you were an officer, you had your own space, much nicer than the poor men stuck in the barracks up the top.
Now I understand they had a very unique way of getting down to the town. Could you please tell us about that?
The men were allowed to go into town, obviously if they wanted to go and, shall we say, let their hair down. There were a series of gas lamps that ran from what is now the top of the Cowgate steps, and those series of gas lamps would actually run down into town, so the men could get down into Dover. And when they wanted to come back, by which time they were probably, shall we say, much worse for wear, they could follow that series of gas lamps back to the drop redoubt and find their way back to barracks before the sergeant caught them and threw them in the cells.
So I know it's called the drop readout. Is there a reason why it is actually called that?
There's a few theories for that, but the most likely is because of the Braden stone, which is actually the foundations of a Roman lighthouse that they found here in the excavations of the 1860s. And the bit of Roman foundation that was sticking up above was known to the locals as the Devil's Drop of mortar. And we actually think that that's where the drop redoubt comes from, other than the fact that it is quite a long drop if you go too far over one side.
So what other interesting sights are there to see up here at the Western Heights?
It's an absolutely enormous site altogether. This is just the extreme eastern end. As you work your way round, there's the grand shaft is directly at the bottom of the hill from the drop redoubt. The site of the grand shaft barracks, they were completely demolished in the 1960s. You've got St Martin's Battery, which has both its Napoleonic and Second World War features. Then you've got the site of Archcliffe Gate, Archcliffe Galleries. You move on down and you would have had the site of the hospital, the South Front Barracks. You keep moving round and you've got, you're coming up to where the Citadel is, and you've got the officers' mess looking directly down on you. Following that round, and you come round towards the northern side of things, you're at the western outworks of the Citadel. You come right round to the outer bastion of the Citadel. You follow it back along and you're at the detached bastion to follow the north lines back along to come back to the drop redoubt. It is enormous. You could get Dover Castle and all its surrounding area in here at least twice over. It's huge.
Is there any other sites similar to the Western Heights around the country you know of?
There are an awful lot of Napoleonic forts and a lot of later forts, which we call Palmerston forts because they were suggested by Prime Minister Palmerston. But none quite like the Western Heights. This is a unique series of fortifications. Other than this, we have places like Fort Amherst in Chatham, Fort Luton, Fort Horsted, Cliff Fort, all these other places, but they're individual forts. There's nothing like this, which is a whole series of fortifications working together. There would have been up to 4,000 men stationed here. It was that big. It was the biggest army base in Britain during the 1870s, and there's nothing quite like it anywhere else.
You mentioned the Grand Shaft earlier. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
The Grand Shaft was built in 1804 to give direct access from the top of the cliff up here down to street level, because otherwise the men would have had to have walked best part of a mile just to travel 140 foot down the cliff. It's a triple spiral staircase, again very, very rare. There's lots of stories that go with it, that each staircase was for each particular rank in the army, so you would have had officers and their ladies, sergeants and their wives, soldiers and their women. But we're not quite sure how true that actually is. There's also a story of a man who had, I believe it was a gentleman from Deal, who actually had a bet to see if he could ride his horse all the way up the Grand Shaft. I don't know if he won that wager or not. I don't like to think, because that's a long way up. But it was a very important means of communication, direct communication and rapid troop movement from the top of the cliff down to the bottom.
So briefly, is there any other facts you want to tell us about the Western Heights at all?
There's so much up here. I could keep you guys talking for a week. There's so much up here. I really would strongly suggest to people to visit our website, come up and see the drop redoubt. It is a fantastic place. It's essential not just to Dover but to Britain's entire historical heritage. It is of a period that isn't always talked about. We often talk about Roman Britain, Tudor Britain, but very rarely do we look at 19th century Britain when we were actually under an almost constant threat of invasion, and it's a period that is quite often overlooked. So come and see it.
Now, I know you mentioned about the event that happened in June. How successful was that?
That was our most successful open day ever. We had nearly 2,000 people through the door this year. the weather was really batting for us. There's no doubt about that. It was a fantastic weekend. We had at least 5 groups of reenactors this year, the most we've ever had. We had quite a few of us staying here right over the entire weekend, and it was an absolutely fantastic weekend, very successful, and most people that were coming up were saying, please open it more, let us see it more. But with just a handful of volunteers and a whole lot of thought, we try and get it open as much as we can. There are also, between April and October, we do also do monthly tours of the Drop Redoubt, which people can always email us and book a place onto.
Now, you mentioned the website. How would our listeners be able to get onto that website?
The address for the website is, if you were to go straight onto Google, as I believe most people probably would, just type in Dover Western Heights and our website will come up top. And then you can work through it. We've got facts about all the buildings across the Heights, how to contact us, what we do on our work days, how to join, and of course a place to contact us if you've got any questions at all about the Heights or about us.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.